background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking, and please ensure that all mobile phones are turned to silent. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen on screen, or use the raise hand function if that is unavailable. When invited to address the committee by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone or camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of the chair or the democratic officer. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and to grab the attention of the chair or the democratic services officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they address the committee, then they should let the chair or the democratic officer know as soon as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Gareth. OK, if we go into the agenda then, item number 1 is apologies for absence.
None provided in advance of the meeting, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Item 2 then is the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of June 2023. Someone prepared to move a correct record? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder? Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Prothero. Is there anyone against that, that they're a correct record? That's the easiest way to do it. No, they're carried. Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda is the declaration of interest and nature of such interest. Do we have any? No, no shown. Okay, then item 4 on the agenda is the report of the Chief Executive of the Corporate Risk Register Quarter 4 update. Tom, I should imagine.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chair, and good evening, committee. Thank you for taking the report this evening. As you say, Chair, this is the end of year position of the Corporate Risk Register. You will, as a committee, receive another update in terms of end of year risk as part of the annual self-assessment report that your committee will see twice in the autumn. But we did want to bring the end of year position to you this evening as quickly as we could do. So the report that's in front of you this evening also bears in mind some of the feedback from your the committee in terms of the brevity of the report, and I'd obviously welcome any feedback on that as well as the content as well. So in terms of an overall summary, there are 17 corporate risks on the register. During quarter 4, 6 of those scored high, 3 risks medium high, 7 medium, and 1 scored a medium low. And within Annex A, you've got the usual table showing you the relative risk scores, as well as the forecast direction of travel in the future, and also how that risk has changed in terms of the existing quarter. And within quarter 4, there has been some movement in risk statuses. The high risk status of Project Zero has been increased to reflect the challenging circumstances that we're operating in, and also the Brexit risk has decreased to a medium risk status with a score of 6. In terms of forecast direction of travel, so looking ahead to the future, we're anticipating that information security, financial fragility, market fragility, the workforce risk, Project Zero, demand management and service capacity will continue to escalate over time, whilst we anticipate that the legislative change and local government reform, integrated health and social care and Brexit risks will continue to diminish over time. As I say, the majority of the risks have maintained their static position within the quarter 4 period. Committee will note, however, that the information security risk, Project Zero risk and Brexit have changed. The national landscape in terms of cyber security has increased, which is reflecting the increased risk around information security. Project Zero, as a programme board, at the request of the committee, did a deep dive review at one of our recent board meetings, looking at in particular the effectiveness of control measures that exist within the programme, and that resulted in suggesting an upward movement in the risk itself, given the vulnerability to the financial fragility risk, but also, as members will note, nearly 90% of our carbon being within the supply chain, and therefore a significant piece of work to address that. In terms of Brexit, the risks remain, and they're reflected in that medium score of 6. However, it's not possible to extract the specific impact of Brexit from some of the other risks, such as cost of living and the market fragility risk. So in of itself, we're suggesting that has diminished. As I say, in terms of the forecast direction of travel, continuing to see legislative change and local government reform continue to reduce. The majority of the requirements of the Local Government Elections Act have now been enacted, so that's very much a watching brief on that one. In terms of integrated health and social care, again, forecast to continue to diminish as development and implementation of the new alliance model between health and social care services is introduced, and Brexit continuing to reduce, but the impacts such as supply chain issues being reflected elsewhere within the register itself. The report does provide you with some information in terms of the rationale for those 6 risks that I mentioned earlier, being ones that we see as increasing over time, and the remaining risks are forecast to remain static. So they're the cost of living, COVID, unauthorised deprivation of liberty safeguards, and ALN risks, along with public building compliance and waste. So the report is being brought this evening for your committee chair to note the position of corporate risks at the end of the Q4, and as ever to review any comments to Cabinet for their consideration alongside the risk register when they see it after the recess.
Thank you for that, Tom. Over to members of the committee for any questions. Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Tom, for that. And just a bit more detail, I suppose. I think if I take them in order, financial fragility, given that the Welsh Government over the last few days has been talking about budgetary pressures they're seeing at the nation level, I'm just wondering whether you've got a direction of travel of staying static. I just wonder whether that should be forecast, closer to the same as the forecast direction of travel. The second point is relating to Project Zero. I presume the only place that's got to go then is very high catastrophic. Is that correct on that one? So that's just a question. I tend to agree with it, but I'm just interested in the answer to that. And I'm just querying the same thing for cost of living crisis, given that inflationary pressures more generally seem to be not coming out of the system in the UK as quickly as elsewhere. I'm just wondering whether or not a static position, accepting that it's 12 high, is still appropriate, So just sorry, there was a last one. And the last one, Tom, you mentioned about Brexit being effectively all of the issues are now throughout the rest of our risk register. I'm just wondering whether that has any relevance to us anymore as a specific risk, or should we just be dealing with the other risks as they apply throughout the rest of the programme? That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hooper. Tom?
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And yes, and I'm just double checking one of them. Yeah. Okie dokie. So in terms of taking them in order, in terms of the financial fragility, we are forecasting that one to increase over time. You mentioned the budgetary pressures at a national level. Clearly, the 2023-24 budget setting process was extremely challenging, and the report that is being taken to Cabinet on the 20th, so Thursday this week, sets out some of the rationale for why the coming year is going to be equally as challenging, with things like pay pressure, the escalating costs of supply, etc. There's significant pressures financially on the local authority, as well as obviously dealing with increased complexity of people presenting for our services, and a wide range of new things that the organisation is having to grapple with. So that's the reason for that one looking to increase over time. And clearly, as we get closer to the Welsh Government's budget in December, following the Chancellor's autumn statement, we should have a better idea in terms of how that is looking at work has commenced now on how we can start to build the budget proposals for next year. In terms of Project Zero, yes, you are right in terms of if the situation worsened, the next level up in the risk framework would be that catastrophic picture. I suppose what we're suggesting in the council's risk scoring of that is that we've identified a series of high risk factors. So the underlying risk is high, and the effectiveness of controls that we've got in place, whilst are wide ranging, there's a huge amount of activity. The ability of those to affect that high risk at the moment, because we're not at a stage of having addressed some of those supply chain issues, is the rationale for that one remaining very high. So two things would have to happen for it to get to catastrophic. One, the inherent nature of that risk would have to change, and then secondly, our ability to affect control over it would have to not increase. And I would anticipate that certainly the effectiveness of the controls that we're putting in place over the next few years will start to increase their ability to influence what we can influence as an organisation. It's a similar picture, I suppose, with cost of living, and we did have quite a lot of discussion when we were reviewing the cost of living risk rating at both the Insight Board and at Strategic Leadership Team, and we felt that its high risk status is probably the right status, and we wouldn't see it moving to catastrophic based on where we currently are. However, that's not to take away from what could be an incredibly challenging period, certainly for our residents, in terms of the forthcoming winter. So I think it's going to be the nature of the things that are presenting themselves rather than their impact in terms of the risk score itself. I think it's a very good question in terms of Brexit. As I said, and you suggested as well, the impacts of that are being seen and articulated throughout the rest of the register. We had kept it on the register as being something that there were some legacy issues. There were some trading arrangements that were still being put in place that were in part impacting on the council. With the majority of those having been put in place, and also the inability now to really extract the specific impact of Brexit alongside a whole host of other macroeconomic impacts, it may well be time to remove that from the register, and obviously committee could recommend the Cabinet consider doing that. I hope that answers those.
Yeah. Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, most of my points were covered by Councillor Hooper, but just to clarify on Project Zero, did the board consider the possibility of changing the impact score on the risk register for Project Zero when it was considering the likelihood of impact?
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Good, John. Yes, we looked at things in the round, and we felt that the impact at this stage was set out against those 4 risk categories.
Right.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom, for this report. I found it a lot easier to understand, and I think even the questions and discussions we've just had I think just showed that the discussion's better, at least certainly is for me anyway. So thank you for that. I think the report's a real improvement. I've got just a couple of questions. So just understanding of the effectiveness of control score on the sort of explanation you've got a table which says they can be scored 0 to 4, with 0 being very low up to 4, which is very high control. But I noticed some of them from like 9, 10, 11 all have a score of 4, but they're rated as medium, and then number 12 has got a 6. So just if we can just have I think I'm probably misunderstanding what that score is. So if you don't mind just going over that. Just a comment, I was going to raise Brexit as well. It's my opinion, I think, from the description as well, that it is sort of covered in others. So I think for me, the heading of Brexit probably is slightly misleading as to what it might be. And I think you're right. I think, and I agree with Councillor Hooper that I think probably that's covered elsewhere. So I think that might be one to suggest to council that we remove. And my last one about Project Zero, which I think comes up a lot, is rather than actually thinking about the risk score, I just wondered at what point, I mean, I recognise there are sort of bits we can't change around what we're going to be going for in terms of 2030, but I just wondered at what point there would be a review to say, do you know what, actually what we're doing is not achievable. We've got a risk score of 12, it's increasing, our controls are having low impact. Is it just that actually what we're set out to achieve isn't achievable, and we actually need to lower our objectives in that area to make them achievable? So just a query around your thoughts on that would be great, please.
Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. So I was just making a note of them as we go through, just coming back to the right paper. So in terms of the effectiveness of control score, it's a notional calculation that is it is made looking at the ability of those controls to influence both the impact and the likelihood score. So both of those are scored in isolation or separately from one another, and then it's a multiplication of those so that one divides against the other in order to get the residual risk score. So that's the reason why sometimes they don't necessarily in that one summary table look as consistent as they otherwise could do. Completely concur in terms of the Brexit discussion, and in terms of the Project Zero risk, I think that's going to be very much influenced now as we will put in our data return to Welsh Government in September, October time, as part of the analysis that Welsh Government will do of that data in order to show us where some of that carbon is and to be understanding the kind of scale of the kind of national challenge. I would expect them to be looking at what the support, what the target, and what areas of activity we need to be looking at North Wales, therefore, from a public sector 2030 perspective. And I think that will probably be the next major driver for a review of the overall risk rating itself. It's going to be one of those things that I think as we've now got programmes in place across Wales to address some of these issues, we need to be constantly looking at how close are we to target, but also how effective is the work that we're able to put in place. So I think it's going to need the kind of constant review. And we did have a really thorough discussion at the programme board recently, and what I've suggested is that each time that we're looking to prepare a report for your committee, I'll take that to the board so that we can have a more holistic discussion, and it's not just me reviewing that risk based on my membership of that board. We're collectively looking at all the facets of it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Tom, only one question from me, just to say as well, I'd support the review of the Brexit risk removal. On the InfoSec one, I agree with the direction of travel for that. Question was around that actually. Does the council or any of its key third parties have any exposure to the recent MoveIt vulnerability? It's been quite well publicised.
With your permission, Matt and Chair, I'll take that one away to speak with my information security colleagues, and I'll get you an answer in the next couple of days.
Sure, I appreciate it was a bit unfair, but yeah, I'd be interested in the answer given the impact it's had on a number of organisations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matthew. Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for allowing me back in. It's just picking up on Nigel's point in relation to Project Zero, and should we effectively change the goalposts to reflect what we can do? And the point I just want to make, and I'm not sure I necessarily want a response to it, is that we shouldn't be scared of putting catastrophic down as our position for this, even if it means that we look weak. You know, our council looks unprepared for what's coming, because I think that's probably a more accurate position, or could be a more accurate position of where we are than we should be afraid. So it's just I just want to make the point that I think catastrophic shouldn't be something we as a council, if we're being honest with the people who are out there, we should be prepared to make. So thank you, Chair, for allowing me that.
Thank you there. Tom, did you want to respond to that, or?
No, certainly not Councillor Hooper's comments.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Councillor Prothero.
I'm kind of agreeing with what Councillor Hooper has just said, and I think the nature of Project Zero, and for every other public sector organisation that's grappling with how on earth are we going to do this, is the fact that we don't really know how we're going to do it. And I think it's quite ironic in a way that while we try and work out all of the different work streams and all of the things that we would need to do to try and reduce our carbon emissions, the risk rating of catastrophic is actually what is happening. You know, the risks of not doing it are catastrophic. So there is an irony in that. And if, as Mark has just said, sorry, Councillor Hooper, if we have to move to catastrophic and just recognise in ourselves that this needs to be a sort of like an overview of everything that we do and a closer examination, then so be it. Because I think that is, and I actually think that's a strength, that we would do that. But that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Prothero. Tom?
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. And what I could certainly do, if yourself, Chair, and committee would like me to, is I can take that feedback directly back to the programme board. We can have a discussion as we're looking at Q1 risk, and we can particularly address that point of actually do we feel it should be catastrophic or not, and put some rationale in your next report. Certainly, that's no problem at all to do.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I think I'd endorse that, what Councillor Prothero did. I don't think we ought to see it as a sign of weakness. We actually ought to see it as a sign of strength on the basis that we know ourselves. And, you know, trying to fudge the issue by lowering it doesn't actually address the issue. So if your board could look at that at the next occasion, that would be good. The other question I've got in regards to financial fragility, apart from the next budget round, which will come out in December. I didn't realise that the government is actually, Welsh Government that is, in social care and looked after children, or whether it's children looked after now, are addressing the issue about residential care placements, and that the private sector can't make any profit out of it. And I'm just wondering whether that's been flagged up as a financial fragility point, but as a very specific issue for the Director of Social Services, because the impact on a local authority budget, if there are no private placements out there for children looked after, and if the council itself hasn't got its own placements where it could place within county, then the impact on the budget and certainly the financial status within that area could be quite substantial. So I don't know whether there's been any discussion on that, and whether it actually ought to be flagged up now as a corporate risk moving forward.
Thank you, Chair, and I can certainly feed back to the Director of Social Services. I am aware that as an issue it is being considered and progressed. There's a transformation programme within social care which the Director leads on, and one of the work streams that he's been looking at has been around capacity planning, and there are plans in place to develop provision within the county for children looked after. My knowledge of children's services is limited to that, so I'll certainly take that feedback, and I can make sure that we provide an update in terms of whether it needs to be a risk in of itself, and whether that's at service or corporate level, or whether we make sure that it's fully addressed within the financial fragility, but also in the market fragility risk, which is particularly on the social care front as well.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for that, Tom. Thank you. Are there any other questions, members? Any comments? None shown. If we go to the recommendations then, the first recommendation is that we note the Q4 position of the corporate risks, April 22, March 23, outlined in the risk summary report Annex A, and refer any comments to Cabinet for their consideration and endorsement at the meeting when Cabinet will consider the report on the corporate risk register for Q4. And I think the issues to be picked up there is the Brexit risk, whether that should be removed now and sort of as it's been dealt with, or collectively within other risks. The second one is in regards to whether it should go to Cabinet on the catastrophic for Project Zero. And the third one clearly is the issue about children looked after and maybe the impact of that. So subject to members agreeing those three issues as being raised in recommendation 2, is someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Nigel. Is there anyone against the recommendations? No, thank you. Thank you, Tom, for that.
Thanks very much.
The next item on the agenda is the unaudited statement of accounts 22-23. Oh, hello, Gemma.
Hello, good evening.
Is that over?
Chair...
Is that over to you?
Yes, please. Chair, I have prepared a very brief set of slides. It's only 10, I promise. Just pulling out some of the key elements of the accounts. Is it okay if I share them, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so in terms of what went well and what didn't go well, so just a very high level overview, and of course we'll know more as we hit the as we finalise the audit. But so closing's been extremely challenging again this year. Obviously, as committee are aware, we went live with the new Oracle system on the 3rd of April, and we also carried out a cash management upgrade within April, which severely impacted the amount of resource within the team, and we also had a couple of resourcing issues during the period, and that was off the back of quite a challenging budget cycle. We did complete the accounts by the 30th of June, and we also completed the draft shared regulatory joint committee accounts, and also the Vale Valleys and Cardiff regional adoption accounts, because they actually surpassed the threshold this year, and so we were required to complete accounts and the comparator. We did have, so the finance support manager did take on those capital accounting reconciliations this year, which gave me a bit more capacity across the rest of the statements. But the revenue accounts are still taking quite a long time to close, and that we do need to address that if we're going to meet the kind of faster close down timescales going forward. Although I do note that could have been impacted by Oracle implementation, because it meant that where people were trying to run reports in the new year, they obviously had to learn what they were doing afresh. We do need to look to automate the process as much as possible going forwards, and there are some opportunities. We can certainly look to tidy up the asset register for 24-25 23, 24 even, and utilise the journal's functionality perhaps a bit more. But there'll be other opportunities. We're a very small finance team and we just don't have that resilience. So we need to take opportunity, those digitalisation opportunities wherever we can. We need to allow more time for review. I know this was picked up when I came to Governance and Audit Committee previously, but we were working right up until, you know, the kind of deadline really. So I think there are a couple of errors that I spotted today in the accounts that we'll pick up during the audit period. So the accounts do reflect that social services deferred income adjustment that was picked up as part of the audit recommendations last year. And I think one thing we hadn't quite counted on this year was that the housing stock had to be revalued. So we were counting on that movement in housing values not being material, but it was. So, but generally across capital, we do need to bring forward those valuations wherever possible, because it just takes a long time just finalising any queries at year end. But part and parcel of that is knowing exactly what market conditions we're going to be dealing with in year, and as you'll be aware, you know, on previous closings, things have come out of the system quite late on in the financial year. So picking up some of the key elements of the account, so looking at usable reserves first, we did have a reduction in usable reserves, which is good news because that's, you know, how we plan to use our reserves. So the use of the council fund was broadly in line with the budgeted sum. It was slightly less, but not significantly so. And we did have some use of earmarked reserves, and that was mostly about 12 million or so was towards the planned capital schemes, but there was some transfer in for the revenue budget and also some transfer out as well. There was some use of the housing revenue account reserve, but that was slightly less than we planned as part of the housing business plan. There's a small drawdown on the capital receipts reserve, but an increase in the capital grants and applied account, and those capital grants will be hopefully utilised during this. In terms of unusable reserves, this has got really significant movement, and I'm sure we'll have seen this across local authority accounts this year. So we've had a significant movement on the pensions liability. So we had a triennial valuation as at 31st of March 2022, and that and some other adjustments in the actuarial assumptions has meant that our pensions reserve, which offsets the pensions liability, has reduced from 277 million to 65 million. And so the pensions reserve offsets that liability. We've also got an increase in the valuation reserve, and that reflects the increase in valuation on council dwellings and also any of the land and buildings assets that are valued on a depreciated replacement cost. And that reflects some of those market value changes and also the change in the cost of building new assets. The capital adjustment account we use to adjust for items that capital items that shouldn't impact the council taxpayer, and so that is absorbing some of those depreciation capital grant adjustments. And then we've got again small movements, but the deferred capital receipts reserve has reduced because we've transferred that into capital receipts in year, and also the accumulated absent account provision increase, and that's partly because of where Easter fell. We do find that that tends to have an impact, but also because the value of our pay has increased quite significantly for 22-23, reflecting that pay award. Moving on to the next slide, that just looks at the comprehensive income and expenditure statements. I just wanted to pick up here a couple of things. So we have restated that slightly just to reflect the establishment of the place and the Corporate Resources Directorate. So that now marries up with the format of our management accounts. And there are also some significant adjustments towards the bottom of the statement. So as I picked up on the unusable reserves, the remeasurement of the pension liability shown at the bottom of this statement, and also those revaluations and the very small sum for impairment against the revaluation reserve. In terms of the balance sheet, just picking up some key points here, property, plant and equipment has increased to 887 million, and that reflects both the capital expenditure and the revaluations in 22-23. Investments have stayed broadly in line with the levels that we saw in 21-22. We have got reduction in debtors, that's reduced from 77 million to 62 million, and I suppose that reflects some of those significant COVID grants falling out and being paid down in year, but also short-term short-term creditors have increased slightly to 59 million. This also shows that movement on the pension liability. So as you can see towards the bottom of the balance sheet, that's been reduced to 65 million. And then borrowing levels have reduced slightly in year as well. And that's because we had a number of loans maturing in year, but we only replaced those in part. And that was just reflecting the fact that those borrowing costs increased in year. And we continue to have relatively high levels of reserves that enabled us to continue that internal borrowing approach that we've been adopting. In terms of capital, as I say, we revalued our council dwellings and any land and buildings assets valued on a depreciated replacement cost. In terms of additions that reflected on that PP note, 19 million in land and buildings, 6 million in council dwellings, 6 million vehicles and equipment. There's 35 million that's gone into assets under construction, and that largely reflects sustainable communities learning schemes that haven't quite completed, and also some of those housing build programmes that were still in construction at year end, and then 8 million for infrastructure. The infrastructure continues to be disclosed separately to the main PP note, and that just reflects those concerns about the accuracy of the asset class. And then the capital financing requirement for the Vale of Glamorgan, excluding those joint committees, has reduced in year, and that reflects that reduced borrowing need. Right, so just picking up a final couple of points on the accounts, but again, I'm happy to answer any questions on the wider accounts. So we continue to consolidate joint committees in the accounts in 22-23. So Glamorgan Archives, Project Worth, Central South Consortium, Shared Regulatory Joint Committees, and Vale Valleys and Cardiff Region Adoption Service. We've also consolidated City Deal to a certain extent. Now, because of the increasing technical nature of those accounts, they did have to get some external advice on those accounts as part of preparing them for 22-23, and so they weren't available for consolidation in year. So what we've done is we've consolidated income and expenditure based on the latest monitoring that was available, and then we've maintained those balance sheet balances at the 21-22 levels, and we'll seek to correct that during the audit period when those accounts become available. In terms of the Big Fresh catering company accounts, they were received relatively late on in the accounts preparation period, but the audit at that time is substantially complete. There are likely that there could be some small adjustments against the consolidation once the audit's been finalised, but they're not expected to be material. Again, their most significant movement against the account shows that pension liability reduction, which is broadly in line with the adjustments we've seen across the other pension funds administered by Cardiff and the Vale. Just moving on now to the two joint committee accounts. So in terms of the Shared Regulatory Joint Committee, the draft accounts were taken to the Joint Committee on the 21st of June when they were substantially complete, and they were subject to final review and sign off by Matt as Treasurer of the Joint Committee by the 28th of June. There was an overspend against some services in the year, but that was limited to the authority-specific services, so Cardiff and the Vale, and both relating to their licensing services. So that's been offset against reserves, but pending the outcome of the audit, we'll be seeking potentially some reimbursement there. There again is a similar movement on the pension liability and some small capital movements reflecting new vehicles purchased and a small capital receipt. And then finally, I have to go back. I've missed out the Vale Valleys and Cardiff Region Adoption Committee. So as I say, this is the first time we've prepared these accounts. They previously were on an annual return, so we did have included the comparisons for 21-22. There is a usable reserve balance of 143,000, but 65,000 of that relates to the underspend in 22-23, and there was some planned use of historic reserve balances in the year as well. The draft accounts were circulated electronically and signed off on the 30th of June. And again, we're seeing that pension liability. So in terms of the accounts there with the auditor, the external auditor, and Julie Owens, who's working with us on the audit from Audit Wales, her and her team have started working through the accounts. It's a slightly different approach this year as Audit Wales explained to you, and they're currently largely in the planning stage, but they are starting to do some testing, and we're working through some working papers, and we are using Inflow, which we indicated we were intending to when I brought the preparatory paper, and so far that's proving quite successful. It's quite motivating seeing the various bar charts and timescales ticking on. But as I say, a very short run through the accounts, but I'm happy to take any questions or pick up any points.
Yes, thank you for that, Gemma. Very comprehensive. I'm sure you could circulate the slides after the committee to the members, which would be very helpful. I was going to ask whether you needed 10 minutes break to take a breath, because that was quite amazing, really. I think you would have a medal for stamina here. So we'll go to the members now for questions, and in waiting is Councillor Hooper.
And I'll keep it quick because I'm not going to speak for as long as that. 2 questions, Gemma. The first one about, I'm interested in whether or not the ways of working has any impact on the process that you go through. So I'm interested in whether hybrid working and home working is helping or hindering the processes you go through as a team, especially given the pressures you've had with people leaving. So I welcome your view on that. And the second one is related to City Deal. You talked about the complexity. Now, I'm a fan of transparency in public accounts, and the public need to understand what's going on in City Deal. Now, if the transparency is because of their various investment functions and, find it difficult to do, without prejudging what it is, I'd be interested in your take as to what the complexities are, and maybe that can help us to talk to residents. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. So I think in terms of the hybrid working, it's a mix. So we did probably go into the office more than we have in previous years, because I think particularly when we were doing the kind of some of the capital adjustments, and Vicky was doing the capital elements for the first time, it was really helpful for us to be in the room working through some of those changes. So I think you do need a mixed approach for closing the accounts. I'm not saying that it rules out remote working, and I think where we're looking to recruit to some posts, we do need to be flexible about that remote working in order to be able to get the candidates with the experience that we need. So I'm not sure how that will pan out going forward. And I know as we work with the auditors as well, we've said that we'll make sure that we keep an open mind about meeting in person to try and expedite that process as well. So I think it's really helpful to be in the same room, but I think I've got to be realistic that, I've got some significant vacancies in my team, and in order to be able to fill those, I think I'm going to have to be flexible about whether people are in the room or not, but I might need them down during closing. So there's ways and means around that. In terms of City Deal, I haven't seen the accounts yet, so I don't know the detail of it, but my understanding is that it relates to complexities around the investments, so where they're consolidating the group element of the accounts rather than the straightforward income and expenditure of the joint committee itself. That's where the complexity is arising, and I think it's partly about where we're doing things that perhaps we haven't done frequently in the past. It's establishing the correct way, the correct treatment that we can apply consistently elsewhere as well. So but as I say, I haven't seen the account, so I can't really comment on the detail of it, but happy to make sure that those accounts are shared once we have them, as long as that's okay from the kind of stage of the audit process. So yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Can I follow up, Chair?
Yeah,
Do you mind?
sure.
And it's one for us as a committee, I think, and I think we should be, I think the City Deal is a concern of mine. If we find it, and if there's any difficulty in transparency, I think we should challenge it. And the question is, and the challenge I suppose for us as an audit committee is, should we receive the City Deal, somebody from the City Deal to present their accounts to us, to be able to take those challenges rather than rely, not that Gemma can't do it, I don't mean that, but they're not her accounts, they're actually somebody else's accounts, and it's quite unfair to expect her to take the challenge. So I wonder whether we can make a request that they come and actually talk us through them in a bit more detail.
Yes, obviously, I think that's a very good suggestion in regards to those accounts, and we just need to be very careful about singling out individuals, because we've got the joint committee accounts and a few other sets of accounts as well, which you know, I would suggest that we see in full going forward, you know, the joint committees and that. But my understanding is on the Cardiff City deal, Gemma, is that they will be available by the end of this month. They should have finalised theirs. I only raised the council, but I don't believe I have to declare an interest, but sitting on 2 other councils where they're dealing with the consolidation of the city deal accounts for the first time. I think they're having the same issues, that they've undertaken their draft accounts for the council, but it's now subject to the city deal accounts coming in after, and then they will deal with them at that time. But I think it's a good point, Councillor Hooper, because the only people who can tell us about them in detail are the accountants from City Deal. So I don't know whether that's Cardiff now. Do Cardiff do the accounts, Gemma? Do we know?
Yes,
Yeah.
they do. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe a request in future, just to have some along if there are questions. Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. Yeah, I can pass that on.
Are there any other questions? No. Are there any comments? No. The only comment I'd like to make, Gemma, is to thank you and your team for preparing these accounts with all due haste. Clearly, they've not met the statutory timetable, I don't believe, because I think they're supposed to be done by the 31st of May. So I should imagine that you've published a notice to the residents to say they've been complied with, and I should imagine there needs to be another notice because the final accounts won't be ready before for the due date. But to thank you and your team, you know, you've said you've got a very small team, you know, to close the accounts in the timescale you do, you know, council shuts down really, I don't mean this unkind, on the 30th of April, and then there you are busily working to close the accounts. So if you could thank your team on behalf of the committee for getting us to where we are now, I would be extremely grateful. And then we've got the recommendations that we to allow the, well, we've reviewed the unaudited accounts for the council. The first thing, we ensure the government, we are informed of the accounts and for the shared regulatory service, and we're also informed of the accounts for Valleys Vale and Cardiff Regional Adoption Service Joint Committee. So if someone's prepared to move that, I'd be extremely grateful. Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder? Oops. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Anyone against? No. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you very much.
Are you doing the annual governance statement, or is that Andrew?
That's Joan, I think. Is it on Andrew? Yes.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
Go and have a lie down now after that.
Sorry for my stream of consciousness.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, members. So this evening you've got your draft annual governance statement for 22-23 before you, and the recommendation is for members of Governance and Audit Committee to recommend its adoption and sign off by the leader and the chief exec. So it is in draft form at the moment, and the information is collated by the internal audit team on behalf of the Vale Council, and incorporates information fed in from a variety of key offices around the organisation. So in terms of questions, we'll do our best as an audit team to respond as members put them to us, but we may need to call on other officers of the council, and we may need to take some things away and get back to committee, if that's okay, Chair. So in terms of the statement itself, as part of the corporate governance arrangements, we need to undertake an annual review of the internal control and governance processes, which results in the annual governance statement. And that will be included within the statement of accounts, which Gemma's just talked you through. The AGS provides an assessment of the council's corporate governance arrangements and appraisal of the controls that are in place to manage the council's key risks and identifies where improvements might need to be made. The overall conclusion for 22-23 is that from a review, assessment and ongoing monitoring work undertaken, that reasonable assurance can be given that the governance arrangements for the VAR continue to be regarded as fit for purpose in accordance with the governance framework. As I said, the governance statement will then be reviewed as part of the external audit of the statement of accounts and will reflect any issues up to the date that is signed off by the external auditor. So, Chair, I don't intend to go through the governance statement in detail, but I will provide an overview. So if I could refer members to page 5 of the statement or 43 of your pack, outlines the purpose of the governance framework initially, and that we need to comply with the Code of Corporate Governance, which supports the annual governance statement. And that is based on the SIP for Solace document, delivering good governance in local government framework. So we are compliant with that framework, and we demonstrate that by going through the 7 governance principles, which are outlined in the statement. We move on to the scope of responsibility and what is governance all about and what does it mean for the council. Well, it sees it as doing the right things in the right way for the right people in a timely, inclusive, open and honest and accountable manner. Bearing in mind that public money is safeguarded, properly accounted for and used economically, efficiently and effectively. So on page 2 is the definition of the principles from A to G. That ties in with our corporate code of governance, which would have been approved by Cabinet. Moving on to the next diagram, links the relationship between the governance principles, the internal controls, and the review of effectiveness, which is all forms part of the annual governance statement. Then we have another diagram of how the Code of Corporate Governance feeds into the annual governance statement and the systems, processes and documentation we have in place to support both of those. So from pages 5 to 26, we identify the individual principle with some examples for 22-23, the arrangements that are in place for that financial year, any performance measures, any outputs and outcomes as some examples. It's not a complete assessment, but it does give members a flavour of how we've demonstrated good governance throughout the organisation. Moving then on to page 27 to 31, there's a review of the effectiveness and examples of how we've demonstrated that throughout the year. 32 to 34 then identifies the progress that has been made on the issues raised in the previous AGS 21-22 and how we've moved that forward in 22-23. And then identifying any significant governance issues for 22-23 before we come to the actual summary, which as I said at the outset, from the review, assessment and ongoing monitoring work undertaken, we've reached the opinion that reasonable assurance can be given that the governance arrangements continue to be regarded as fit for purpose in accordance with the governance framework for Vale Council. And therefore we would be recommending to members that, provided you're happy with it, we sign that off by the Chief Exec and the Leader of the Council. In terms of the format of the AGS, as mentioned at the outset, this is a draft version. Once members are happy with it, it will be sent through to the comms team and it will be put into the format that members saw last year to feed into the statement of accounts, which will be a much more user-friendly, more visible projection of the annual governance statement. So at that stage, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for that. Open it up to the floor now. Are there any questions? Councillor Hooper? You're on mute.
Aha. Aha. Thank you, Chair. Just a general point about, so this is a good document. I understood it. I read it. I worry about whether or not it's a document that translates to the residents of the Vale, and I feel like it should. And I suppose the question for you is what you talked about when it gets translated by the comms team. I think that needs some real effort to make sure it's something that looks, can it be on one sheet of paper almost, and can it be visually intriguing, interesting, and relevant? And it's just, I suppose, I'd be interested in your views as to how you, as the auditors, just internal auditors, going to work with comms people to make sure it doesn't lose its power. Then, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we'll certainly do that. I can show members the last year's version of the AGS if that's helpful, because it's certainly much more user friendly. It's much more easy to read than the statements in front of you. I mean, it was in the accounts last year. If that would help. But we certainly take on board the members' comments and considerations and talk that through with our colleagues in communications and obviously with Matt and Gemma to make sure that it fits the bill in terms of the annual statement of accounts.
Can I suggest, subject to Councillor Hooper agreeing, that you circulate that outside the meeting following the end of this meeting, and therefore if there are any questions then or comments that anyone interested can put them back to you, Andrew. You happy with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Lovely. Okay, thanks. Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the report, Andrew. As Councillor Hooper, I completely agree with what was said then in terms of just making it accessible. There's just a lot of information in there, isn't there? So it's just about how do you get that across in the best possible way. A couple of quick questions. Firstly, I noticed this is a draft, so there are a couple of very minor spelling things and things like that. Just if you want that feedback, let me know and I'll email that through separately if anyone wants it, or if it's going to be proofread in advance, I'll leave that to you. On page 8, it talks about Zoom webinars as a mean to consult. This is under ensuring openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement. So Zoom webinars and also e-petitions function being launched in May. Just because it's left as that was launched in May 22, there isn't really any information about sort of the impact of that or whether it's ongoing. I just wonder whether that might be useful to add. Otherwise, it sounds like a bit of a almost we put this in place, therefore we're not worried about it anymore. But given the fact how early that was in the year, whether we could add something in there about how successful that's been might be useful, just as a comment. And the third and final point was on page 22. It talks about the risk management strategy being out of date and represents a risk that needs to be addressed. And it says this work has commenced with governance and audit committee members, the strategic leadership team, etc. And I just wanted to be clear on what our role was in that and whether we had commenced that work and whether just I understood our role in that, really. And that was it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel.
Okay,
Andrew?
thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nigel. Yes, if you could send the typos through to me separately, that would be great. I'll pick them up as a overall review anyway, but that would be handy just to get that information. In terms of the Zoom calls and impact, I'll take that away and find out that information. Make sure we update the AGS in accordance to that. I don't know the answer offhand. And likewise with page 22, the risk management side of things, being out of date and work, I'll need to double check that as well to see where we are with that, because that's a statement that obviously we need to make sure is correct before we finalise the version.
Thank you for that, Nigel. It'd be interesting to know what work we're actually doing on it. If we're being said we are doing it, but there we are. Matt.
I just wanted to come back on Councillor Hooper's comments and Andrew's response to those. When this goes through the comms team, we'll have a version that's certainly a little bit more visually pleasing, but it won't be an executive summary as such. So I just wanted to manage expectations, but I think personally an executive summary would be handy. obviously, as Andrew's gone through it, it needs to meet certain criteria in the way that we pull the thing together. But in terms of accessibility, it is quite a lot to absorb, isn't it? So no promises, but we'll have a look at it, see if it's possible to pull an executive summary together.
Okay, good. Councillor Good, John.
Yeah, just a few points. First off, on Nigel's point on the e-petitions, I believe there hasn't been much work done on that recently. So I know other councils have been quite forward with that and been working with it. We haven't quite been as good with that. I'm even aware of ex-councillors using other petition schemes to try and petition the council when we have our own, which seems a much easier way of doing things for everyone involved, but there we go. I just wanted to query on the council complaints, and I wonder how much of that we need to include and how much of that we need to reflect on, because I'll be frank, it's continue to lower the percentage that is of those that were handled within our council timescales that we're targeting, which already is quite a long period of time, if I'm not mistaken. So it's down from about 60% to 51% this year. The number that has actually been handled within the timescales we're targeting is about the same, a little bit higher, but the number of complaints has increased. So I wonder how much of that we need to reflect on within this document. I don't think it would be seen as a massive show of strength of the council, particularly for residents or anyone involved. I do want to highlight some fantastic work that's been done, such as the work that's been done over the past year with workforce has been significant, although there's ever more to do as the market continues to be more fragile as time goes on, as we have a labour shortage and inflation continues to skyrocket or and set in place, with core inflation being extremely high. So there are some positives there, there are some negatives there. I just wonder how much of that we should be reflecting on and deciding what we can do in the future to make things better.
Thank you, Councillor John. Andrew, and I've got Tom's hand showing as well. So
I think thanks, Joe. I think we'll certainly reflect on that point, but I think Tom might want to come in to respond.
yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and yeah, thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. In terms of the query around complaints, Tony Curtis, the operational manager for customer relations, who is also responsible for complaints handling, is going to be putting some time in the diary with yourselves as a committee to explore the way that the annual complaints and compliments report is presented to your committee. I know obviously that you're aware that you have some specific duties in relation to complaints and compliments that were introduced by the Local Government and Elections Act in 2021. So that report is really important, and based on the feedback from the discussions last year at committee, I'm very keen to make sure that that report is really fit for purpose for you as a committee. So I wonder if perhaps Andrew, with the permission of the chair, if we sort that out and we look at the timing for the report that would traditionally come in the early autumn to the committee, we could perhaps then reflect some of the updated thoughts of how the committee want to see that information and the findings within the AGS itself. And just following up on the query from Nigel in terms of the work around corporate risk that's referred to in the AGS, I think that's referring to the initial discussions and workshop that we had during that year, looking at the kind of presentation of risk reporting, and obviously there's been some progress in the fact that we've gone from 453 pages down to 16 for you this evening, but there is still work to do, and similarly I'm keen to put some of that informal workshop style discussion sessions in for Governance and Audit Committee members to look at how risk is managed and reported to yourselves.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other questions? Are there any comments? The only comment I'd make then, Tom, from what you've just indicated, is obviously the recommendation before committee is that draft annual governance statement 22-23 be recommended for adoption by the leader and chief exec. Clearly, there are some amendments, tweaks, and such like to be done. So we just can't sign it straight off now for adoption if all those amendments, tweaks, etc., need to be undertaken. So do you want us to agree in principle, subject to the comments made at committee tonight, and then be recommended for adoption by the leader and chief exec?
I think it would be really useful, Chair, if perhaps that's the recommendation to Cabinet that, or sorry, to the leader and the chief exec, that those matters are addressed now as the AGS is developed. Andrew mentioned earlier that obviously this will be finalised as part of the statement of accounts later on in the calendar year. So it does afford us some opportunity to add and embellish some of that information as committee have requested. But I think because it's additional and clarification work that can be done as the AGS is developed, perhaps, Andrew, that we can take that endorsement of the draft as we're presenting this evening, subject to that work being completed prior to the final version being reported.
Okay, if members are happy with that the draft annual governance statement for 22-23 be agreed in principle, subject to the discussions, amendments, corrections made at committee this evening, and once finalised, will be obviously recommended for adoption by the leader and chief exec. I should imagine it'll come back to us anyway beforehand, and then we can just finalise that when it comes with the statement of accounts, I should imagine. Is that the process? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So that recommendation, hopefully Gareth has made a note of it. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Nigel. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Anyone against? No? Thank you very much, everyone, for that. The next item on the agenda is I think, Stanwell School, I believe, just check. It's the report the Head of Regional Internal Audit Service. It's a Stanwell School capital project update. As members know, it was 4 weeks ago, just over 4 weeks ago, we considered this matter and obviously set out, I think, a series of about 8 recommendations for the council to consider and to move forward. You'll be aware that we asked Andrew to come back tonight just to give us a quick update into where he's got in regards to preparing the report that will come to us now in September in regards to the procurement exercise that was undertaken, any other issues that have arisen there in regards to finances, governing body, etc., etc. So might I suggest, committee, that rather than get embroiled into discussion this evening on specifics, that we await the full report for September when we can consider that in full, rather than maybe having only half a story this evening, because I know there is a little bit more work to be done on Stanwell, and given the seriousness of the matter, which we considered it to be, that we need to get this right and get the facts right. So if members are happy with that, I'll just ask Andrew to give us a quick overview as to where we're at. And then, unless there are any burning questions, that we note his update and we move on to the next item. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate your comments here very much so. In terms of the audit, it is ongoing. We have undertaken some of the recommendations that were made last at your committee in June. We've been out to visit the SLT of the school, and we've presented the report to the governing body of the school. The audit work is ongoing. We're trying to get as much information as we possibly can, as much documentation pulled together to give a much better picture, a much better response to you in terms of pulling the report together. So that said, the report has not yet been completed because the work is ongoing. But in terms of where we are, there's probably the fact that we haven't found much more than we did previously that would change our views from the original report. The council's financial and contract procedures were not followed by the school, albeit they did follow their own financial procedures. There were 3 quotes for the work, but not as expected in terms of the recognised route for a procurement of that particular size. There was no evidence of any effective budget monitoring within the school, and there appeared to be lack of effective communication within the governing body. So nothing that the committee weren't already aware of. But as you say, Chair, the work is ongoing, and I would be more comfortable reporting back a fuller, more accurate picture in September if members agree with your comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, members, unless there are any burning questions, and I know there is certainly a keen interest by elected representatives. Councillor Prothero, I know, has got a keen interest in procurement, as have I. And I think we need to get all the ducks in the row, whether in the right order or not, as to what's happened here, so that we can make a strong determination and some further recommendations moving forward. I think the reassurance that Andrew's given us this evening is that not a lot have changed. So that, you know, what they told us previously is still in existence. It's just as concerning as it was back in June. But hopefully the report in September will be full and balanced, and obviously something then we can discuss in greater detail. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with the process you've just laid out. I just have one quick one for Andrew, which is just, are they positively engaging with the work you're undertaking now? I mean, not suggesting by now that they weren't engaging positively before, but as part of this process you're now doing, are they positively engaging with you and the team?
Short answer is yes. Yeah, there's an acting head in place. There's a updated SLT, and the answer is yes.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Any other burning questions, anyone? So can I suggest then that we note Andrew's oral update, and if someone's prepared to move that so we can move on. Thank you, Nigel. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Hooper, thank you very much. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the annual corporate fraud report. Hi, Joan.
Hello. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. As the Chair's just said, agenda item 8 is our annual corporate fraud report, and this provides members of the committee with details of the actions undertaken in respect of counter fraud during 22-23. The Council's counter fraud strategy and framework 21-24 underpins the Council's commitment to prevent all forms of fraud, bribery and corruption, whether it be attempted externally to or from within the Council, and progress is outlined within the annual report. The annual report is at Appendix A, and I don't intend to go through it in detail, but I will briefly highlight the key points within each section, if that's okay. Section 2 of the annual report outlines the proactive work undertaken during the year. The agreed action plan is at Annex 1, which details the progress made against each task. However, I'd like to highlight that face-to-face fraud awareness training sessions have been successfully rolled out during the year, and as at March, the 31st of March, 71 staff had attended. These were mostly in corporate resources because we felt that was where sort of a lot of the face-to-face finance issues are, but now it's being rolled out throughout the council in different directorates, so more sessions are planned. Section 3 of the report outlines the progress made with the National Fraud Initiative. Table 1 illustrates that following investigation, 7 creditor matches were found to be duplicate payments and therefore recoverable by the council. And in addition, data matched to the HMRC household composition information identified additional adults over 18 resident in properties, and this therefore identified where council tax reduction may not be applicable. The council also receives single person discount matches annually, and if it's determined that the single person discount is incorrectly claimed and applied, an adjustment is made to the account to recover the incorrect payment, and this is detailed in table 2. Therefore, the values in table 1 and table 2 are being recovered by the council. Section 4 highlights the reactive fraud work that has been undertaken during 22-23. These have been generated by concerns raised via the Speak Out initiative, which we discussed previously when it was launched, or by managers or officers raising the concerns directly with internal audit. There were 6 matters reviewed in 22-23, and these are detailed in table 3 within Appendix A. Section 5 gives examples of collaborative working that we take as a fraud section, and also just worth noting, the councils agreed during the year to joint working with the DWP, and protocols are currently being put in place to enable this. In addition, the council benefit investigations will commence shortly, and to enable that, revised enforcement and prosecution policy is currently being compiled. That's all I intended to say, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Joan. Any questions, members? Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Joan. I mean, I suppose a comment first of all, which I know you're coming to, so you always shout at me for putting them in the wrong order, but comment first that I think it is pleasing to see that there is action taken where fraud is identified. So I think that's a real positive. In terms of the question, Annex 1, the fraud action plan, I think there's a little lack of transparency that unless I'm reading it wrong, 3 of the actions, so unders number 2, 4 and 13, they all now have dates for completion of 2023-24. Looking back at this same report last year, they had action points for 22-23, so the date's just been pushed back a year. I think it just might not look very transparent just to keep extending the dates without showing you're extending the dates. So just whether that needs to be more transparently documented. But that was my only comment. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Okay with that, Joan?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we have started, as I said, the prosecution policy. We just haven't finished it, which is why I pushed the date out. But I take on board your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Are there any other questions? Oh, Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, again, I think it'd be great to highlight just a little bit of last year as well comparison. So I had to go back to last year's report to see how it's doing in comparison. I know there's COVID grants is no longer a factor in this year's, which is very important and something to point out as part of that. However, I think it's quite useful to have that visual comparison right next to each other. I just wanted to ask, because there did seem to be one rather large misstatement regarding a creditor. I just wanted to know, basically, has that been or well complied with your team? Has that been organised quite effectively and quickly? Is there anything more that could have been done to prevent that, or are you satisfied with how that was dealt with?
Thank you. If I can answer that, Chair.
Yes, Joan.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the creditor matches you're talking about, the 7. Yes. Yeah, we it was duplicate payments. It was difficult to get to the bottom of. We've worked with the department involved, and they've confirmed it was a duplicate. It wasn't so much a process issue. It was a manual error. For the majority, we've addressed that, and we're actually going to undertake more audit, a general audit in that area, just to confirm that that is an isolated incident. But yes, we have recovered most of the money, and recovery is in process for the rest of it. So we are getting it back.
Fantastic.
That's good, John. Thank you, Joan. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Joan, just a question. I might be getting myself a bit lost on 3.3 and then through to 3.5. So 3.3 says October 2020 data extraction and 77 frauds identified during 22-23. And later on, we say there's a new data matching exercise in October 2022, and there was 2,946. And I'm just trying to get my head around the figures. If there's been a massive increase, or are we working on the right set of data, or what are we working on, and should I be worried, I guess is my question.
Okay, thank you. If I answer that one. Yeah, it is confusing because it's a biannual match. The 2022 match, we kind of addressed then in 21-22, and we carried on looking at those in 22-23. So the 77 in table 1 are a result of the original 2020 match that we were still working through. Meanwhile, data was extracted in October 2022, and the new matches, which are the 2,946, did come into the council January time. They're not included in table 1 because we were coming to the end of the 2020 matches. So although we've received the matches, I haven't reported on them, on what we're doing. That's ongoing work. So they've now been distributed to the relevant service directorates, and they're working through them. So we do monitor them and we've tracked them, but they're not in this report at all. So you'll get those in the annual report, but equally we do track them monthly, and we've got working groups to make sure they're being addressed.
Thank you, Joan. If I could just for my clarification. So if you get an update, those 3,000 updated matches through, is it worth almost reconciling those against the ones you've got outstanding, given you've got updated data, to see if any of them are still active or not, or do they not overlap to that point?
Right. The problem we have is the information is as it is extracted at that certain date. So of those 2,946, there will be ones in there that were identified in 2020 match, because it's either data cleansing and that still hasn't been cleansed and therefore it still existed in October 2022, or there's a situation, for example, if you were employed by the council and you also acted as a poll clerk for elections, it looks then from the match very core data that you're getting 2 payments, that they're on the payroll twice, where in fact we know it's not. So 2,946 sounds huge, but obviously the initial sniff can get rid of a lot of those because we know about them and there's reasons for that. So it sounds alarming, but please be assured that some of those will be top sliced out of there because we would know the reasons for it, and then we work on the actual matches as we go through.
Perfect. That makes sense. Thank you very much, Joan.
Thank you.
And Andrew, did you want to add anything?
Just to reiterate what Joan said, really, she's covered off the key element of it. Is this the matches when we get them through from NFI? It's a coordinated process by the Cabinet Office, so it's out of our control. It's matched with 1,200 other organisations across the UK. The indications of potential fraud, they're not actual fraud. So that's where we palm them out to the various service areas to clarify whether or not there is a fraud, as Joan's just explained. And if there is, then they take further action. But that 3,000 odd number is likely to be reduced in terms of the actual number of frauds.
Thank you for that, Andrew, and the clarification. Matthew, is that okay? Oh. Okay. Are there any other questions? Any comments? No. The recommendation then is that we note the report and the measures in place and the work being undertaken to prevent and detect fraud and error. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Matthew. Can I have a seconder? Whoops, Councillor Hooper, thank you very much. Anyone against? No, thank you. That's carried. The last item, I think, is the forward work programme.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a report that's familiar to committee. It's the updated forward work programme. The table at 2.3 lists the items due to the next meeting, which is on the 18th of September. And Appendix A provides the detailed timetable. So members of the committee are asked to endorse the schedule of items for the next meeting, or if they've got any comments that we can address. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Any comments? Okay, I'll comment on it, Joan. We need to include Stanwell School.
Yeah.
Because it's not mentioned within the in the work programme for the 18th of September. And I'd also ask, in regards to Stanwell School, that Democratic Services or Andrew, in consultation with Democratic Services, give consideration as to whether the report needs to be open or closed, whether it needs to be open report or exempt, because I don't know whether we're going to be disclosing any information about the individuals, etc., in that report. So if consideration could be looked at there. Matthew, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, just looking at this last minute. I was today. There's a tick against Governance and Audit Committee annual report. Now, I think I was paying attention enough to know we didn't go through that, so I don't know whether that's an oversight and that's down the line or just recognised it.
Okay. Councillor Hooper.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether we should put something in about taking the Cardiff City Region accounts. And I know you, Chair, you said let's not pick on anyone, but their accounts are seem the ones that are could be the ones that are most complicated. Yeah. So I just wonder whether that should be in there.
I've got no objection to it being added. Clearly, it's a matter for Cardiff City Region to decide whether they wish to come along or not. But I would have thought they would want to, on the basis of openness and transparency. But the other issue we've got to remember is that they cover 10 councils. So I think, as we said to Gemma, make the request and let's see what comes of that. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to Matthew's point, the Governance and Audit Committee annual report, that's with me at the moment. I've drafted a version. I just wanted to make sure that you're comfortable with it before I share it to the Audit Committee, so I'll make sure it gets sent on to you outside of the meeting, and then you can comment on it, and then I can bring it back into committee for September, if that's okay with members.
Yeah, I think that's great, Andrew. I think if members could comment on it, because obviously we wanted it to be a bit of a review of what we've done over the last 12 months
Sure.
as a committee, any lessons to be learned if we can, and move it forward. So the sooner
Sure.
you get that out, the better, really. Thank you, Andrew.
No worries. Thanks, Chair.
And that will go on the agenda then for the 18th of September as well. Yeah, we've got a very busy agenda, so just be mindful of that.
Okay, Chair.
Okay, we've got the recommendation then. The recommendation before us is that we note the forward work programme, and obviously Joan will pick up the points where we've asked for the 3 additional items: Stanwell School, Cardiff City Region accounts, and the annual report to also be brought to committee as well. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Nigel. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Hooper, thank you. Anyone object? No, thank you very much. I think the next one is part 2. Any other item deemed necessary by the chair in regards to part 1? I have none. Part 2, which is exempt items. Clearly, we're not going to go into a closed session because there are no items. Can I just thank all the members and officers for attending the meeting this evening. Thank you for the constructive debate, and I now close the meeting. Thank you all very much.